Good day, co-masterants, especially to our professor, Dr. Jonas Olandria. I am Charlie John Q. Peligro, and today I'm going to report my assigned topic about approaches of educational planning. Shall we get started? Okay, so before I start my report, let us have some quick overview about educational planning. So according from the first reporter, Mr. Mark Jason Felisolda, according to his report, educational planning, it is the process of determining the objectives of education, educational institution, or educational program, and the means of activities, procedures, resources, and etc. for attaining them. He also defined that it is the process of making arrangements or preparation to facilitate the training and instruction or study that leads to the acquisition of skills or knowledge or the development of reasoning and judgment. Okay, so to ensure effective and efficient provision of education in aligning educational goals with actual performance and activities carried out in educational institution, so according to UNESCO and IIPP, there are two major category in planning. So these two major category in planning in determining these approaches were traditional planning, which determines the approaches that I'm going to discuss later, and also strategic planning that uses traditional planning approaches plus the strategic planning that uses stages and activities such as diagnosis, policy formulation, planning targets and operation, and monitoring. So my dear masterants, for my report, I'll be discussing about traditional educational planning approaches. Meanwhile, Ma'am Cheryl Ampolocchio will be discussing about the strategic planning approaches further for better understanding. Okay, distribution of resources depends on the different priorities of education at different stages combined with economic needs of the country. As per, as per Adesina 1982, so at his book, there are three rival approaches are present in terms of educational planning, which are as follows. First, we have the manpower requirement approach. So this approach focuses on the labor market, while the social demand approach focuses on community linkages. And lastly, we have the cost-benefit approach, which focuses on profit, money, or outcome. Okay, so now let's define these three rival approaches for better understanding. Okay, so first, we have the social demand approach. So this involves the calculation of determining that the situation is in the prospect of cost, supply of teachers, plant and resources, and output of the school level at the end of the specified planning period if existing school provision remain more or less as it is. So the social demand approach focuses on community and linkages. Education is considered to be as the consumer good that should be available to all as soon as possible. Hence, this approach depends upon the number of students getting it to the particular stream of education or the aspiration of the parents for the type of education for their children. So meanwhile, Thompson supported this approach, and according to him, it is also includes a calculation of what the situation would be and that would be required for various kinds of social demand were acceded to. So the calculation provides a baseline for projecting a desirable changes in the system, notably the scale. In other words, when the planners are the time of educational planning take in to the account the social demand for short or long-term goals is considered as a social demand approach of educational planning. So however, this approach is usually favored by politicians and educationists. When following this approach, the educational planners cannot afford to give due respect to the aggregate popular demand for education while drawing up the educational plans because the popular demand must receive the top priority in the allocation of the scarce resources. So, of course, there can be situation when the social demands are unrealistic. In this case, the planners satisfy the social demand that may lead to a poor quality and wastage of public resources. Since social demand approach considers concurrent demand for education based on some demographic profile in the members of the society, here are the advantages of the social demand approach. First, it is suitable for supporting a political tool to meet the need to satisfy the demands of the general public. Secondly, the approach provides the planners with most appropriate numbers of places where educational facilities have to be provided. Third, this kind of planning techniques are most suitable where resources are acutely limited and such kinds of quantities of education are planned which will offer the greatest good to the greatest number. On the other hand, social demand approach has its limitations. First, the approach in no way has a command over factors like price of education. The approach has no power to manage the absorption of trained personnel in the economy. And the third, the approach is poor in the sense that it does not in any way lay claim to whether the resources expended are economically prearranged. The approach does not provide any kind of guidance as to how best to meet the identified needs. Now let's define the second approach in educational planning, which is the manpower approach or human resource development approach. So the manpower approach deals with human resources development. Thus, this focus is to forecast the manpower needs of the economy of the particular country or at the global level depending on the context. This approach states that manpower is changeable and can be customized according to the social, technical, and economic development of the society. So manpower is the most forceful, significant, and active function of the educational system of any nation. In other words, this approach is based on the conception that the educational system is primarily called upon to supply the economic system with the qualified personnel required at all levels. So, this approach focuses on the vocationalization of education. The other ideas such as skill-based education and multiple educational courses leading to the fulfillment of manpower requirement of the nation. So based on the manpower needs of the country, this approach calculates the kinds and all levels of education is necessary to meet this requirement. Find the advantages of manpower approach. So first, according to this approach, this approach holds a significant position in the country's economy, major contributes to the nation's growth, emphasizing the necessity of education. It does not need sophisticated statistical studies and can easily point out the extreme gaps of disparities in education output, patterns that need necessary antidotes. And lastly, it is effectively guides educators and policymakers on how roughly educational qualifications of labor force ought to be developed in the future. So since the knowledge and skills of the labor force is the key player, manpower approach can choose qualified persons in different positions, just like in the Philippines setting in DepEd. So they were hired qualified applicants or qualified teachers by means of ranking. Next, however, in manpower approach, it also has limitations. So first, manpower approach may overemphasize the notion of unemployment and underemployment, which may become challenged to move forward the right kind of education which may be development oriented and thereby creating its own job. So as what I stated earlier in educational planning, manpower approach results to job pending employments because they were ranked before they get in the position by means of registered qualified applicant list or the RQA. Next, educational planners in this approach get a limited guidance in the sense that it does not tell what can be actually achieved in every level of education, in primary and secondary. It suggests that curbing of the expansion of primary education until the nation is rich enough to expand it. This is not a healthy sign for any country because it is primary education which lays the foundation of a developing nation. Yes, since the applicants are ranked to get an item in different levels, we take consideration into job matching because nowadays, pending applicants who didn't get in the position yet find another job which leads them to job mismatch. So another limitation of manpower approach, we have it gives biased view of manpower needs, which are mostly focused in the urban setting. Thus, the planner may not give due attention to education requirements of semi-skilled and unskilled workers in the cities and vast majority of workers that live in rural areas. It is impossible to make a fairly reliable forecast of manpower requirements far enough ahead of time because many economic, technological, and other uncertainties which are involved, especially in rapidly changing world. Okay, let's proceed to the third approach in educational planning, which is the cost-benefit or rate-return approach. Okay, so there are different terminologies used to define the rate of return approach, which is as follows. It sometimes can be called as cost-benefit analysis, cost-effectiveness approach, rate-return approach, and lastly, it is sometimes called as cost-benefit approach. Okay, so this kind of approach provides a method to appraise future benefits in accordance to the costs that need to be made in the present. In terms of education, the proponent of this approach is of the belief that expenditure on education should be seen as an investment on the national level which would give returns in the form of higher productivity and greater earnings of the educated people. So this kind of approach or educational investment according to the needs of education, subsect just like the educational subsectors with the best rate of return. Okay, so cost benefit approach, um, Adesina, 1981, he supported this approach that the cost benefit approach looks at each level of education as investment in human beings with a purpose that the returns will help to improve the whole economy. And meanwhile, an economist supported this approach by Maureen McDowell. It is a systematic comparison of magnitude of cost and benefits and some form of investment. Thus, about the advantages of rate of return approach. First, it is possible to measure or quantify the increase in productivity of an educated person using this approach by looking at the age of earning structure of the educated person. Secondly, it shows the connection between the cost of gaining more education and increase in reimbursement which results from additional education. Third, the analysis can show or propose the directions in which educational systems of a society should expand so as to maximize the earning competence of its citizens. Rate of return approach has its limitation. First, at times, salaries reflect productivity may be a wrong assumption. Secondly, it is not easy to quantify the advantages that are obtained from investing in any type of education. Next, the differential in the worker's income cannot be accredited to the additional education acquired in developing countries. It can be attributed to other aspects like family background, habits, primordial factors, and customers. Next, some studies are of the view that primary education provides the highest return to the society on the basis of calculation of social return rates for all education levels. However, this approach does not agree to do the same. And lastly, certain complexities are present in this type of planning as it needs to clarify and work out of the educational investment that needs to work out that are needs to be made and its corresponding returns in the form of benefits that are gained by the individual and the society as a whole. The method to measure the benefits of individuals and society is rather difficult. So, if this approach were not studied, there could be possibility to increase unemployment or job mismatch and curriculum mismatch, which could affect the economic growth of the country. So before I end my report, allow me to leave a message or a quote. So remember the two benefits of failure. First, if you do fail, you learn what doesn't work. Second, the failure gives you the opportunity to try a new approach. By Roger Van Och. And here's my reference of my report. And that's it. Thank you for listening and watching. I hope you learned something about my report. Once again, I am Charlie Jan Kiatchon Peligro for the approaches in educational planning. Thank you so much and God bless us all.